Well, I was raised in Chase, Kansas, right smack in the middle of the state, little town of about 800 people. And music was just part of my growing up DNA. There was always music in the house. Oddly enough, no country music. And Chase it's a little oil boom town, you know, oil and wheat farming. That was it. So, but my mom and dad were really, you know, they just loved big band music, more of the pop music of that time, you know, the Andrews Sisters, Gail Storm, of course, Ellington, Guy Lombardo's Sunday radio show would come in, you know, every Sunday night. That would be something that we had to listen to. And there was music playing a lot in the house. Mom played piano. My dad played, oddly enough, a ukulele. And I got my first trumpet. I mean, I was really young. That was my first instrument, trumpet. And I'm thinking I was like in the 5th grade, maybe. And oddly enough, really excelled at it. I mean, when I was in the 7th grade, I'd been elevated to play in the high school band, and I was playing first trumpet, you know, 3rd chair first trumpet. I could sight read really quick, and I could always remember parts. I could always remember everybody else's parts. And my music teacher, Mr. Miller, used to kind of like get on me because sometimes I'd just say, you know, I really dig the 3rd harmony part on this trumpet. And so I would sort of vacate mine and jump on the 3rd trumpet, you know. But anyway, so I really didn't have any real background in country music. It was all just the popular music of that day, you know. At the age of, I think, 13, my family up and moved to Denver. And the trumpet sort of went by the wayside because where we lived, you know, I mean, muted trumpets are a little bit more quieter, but I don't know, that sort of fell by the wayside. And, you know, rock and roll was flaring up. And Duane Eddy and, you know, the Bulldog, and of course Elvis Presley, Fats Domino.
This would have been mid-50s?
This would have been, yeah, about 56. And, you know, Fats Domino was actually my first childhood hero rock star. I adored Fats Domino. And then, you know, as soon as I could play 3 chords, and then jumped from EA to B7 to where I could play C, A minor, F, and G. And between those combo of progressions, what couldn't I play, you know, that I was hearing on the radio? So immediately formed a little band, and we'd play around and go to basement parties and things like that. And so, you know, eventually, you know, after high school, I had to sort of figure out what I was going to do with my life, and it wasn't going to college. That wasn't a possibility. So I joined the Air Force, and of course I did meet. Well, I guess I was 17 when I met my wife Janelle, and fell hopelessly in love with her immediately. And by the time, you know, I got through basic training and had been in for about 4 or 5 months, I came home on leave and I popped a question to her if she'd marry me. And she said yes, and even better, a couple of days later, she didn't change her mind. So anyway, and here we are, you know, today, as happy as we've ever been, you know, more in love, I think, if possible. I guess it is possible, sure it is. So anyway, during the Air Force, a lot of great things happened to me. You know, I grew up as a person. I sort of found myself as a person, gained confidence you know, as just a guy, you know. And but it did, and it had bands all the time. All the time I was in the Air Force, we put together combos, and we would when I was married, it really helped because we, you know, you pick up an extra, you know, 10, 15, 20 bucks, you know, a weekend. It was a big deal back then. So always had bands together. But about a year and a half before my enlistment was up, which was a 4-year enlistment, you know, a lot of things were happening. Vietnam was really cranking up, you know, and had lost some friends over there. And you know, and I don't know, I just, you know, I didn't think the Air Force was going to be my career, although I had no idea what it was, what I would do other than what I'd been doing for that period of time. So but there again, having the band, always listening to music, always having to learn new songs, you know. At that time, I was just so into Curtis Mayfield and the Impressions. All the records that he was making on his group, also, you know, he's producing Major Lance and all these other bands coming out of Chicago. And, you know, I was really sort of getting troubled about, you know, what am I going to do? I mean, I was married. We had our first daughter. You know, where was this heading? And I was had the music turned down kind of low in our tiny little apartment we had. And I think Dinah and Janelle were in bed, actually. And I'm listening to Major Lance, which Curtis had produced. And I was looking at the back of that cover. Actually, I think it was Curtis Mayfield. I think it was The Impressions. It was his record. And, you know, reading all the credits and everything, and I would shut my eyes when I would listen to this music. And I have one speaker here and one here, and I swear I could see that studio. I could envision where the muted trumpets were. You know, the guy that played castanets on Gypsy Woman, I could figure out where he was, you know. I could just envision these things, and my eyes started wandering, and I got to the bottom right-hand corner, and there's a fellow's name. It said recording engineer. And I said, you know, that's it. That's what I'm going to grow up to be. And so I got terribly energized, and I had all of this confidence that, wow, I'm glad this revelation has, you know, come upon me. So then I had to figure out, well, how do you prepare yourself for anything like this, you know? And so I went to, in the Air Force, we had to, you know, they always want you to keep improving yourself, taking more classes in this, studying this, take college courses. That always looks good on your performance report, you know? So I went to my counselor. Well, it wasn't a counselor. I went to the guy that ran the place, and I said, you know, I need to study on how to be a recording engineer. And the guy looks at me and says, excuse me? I said, a recording engineer. And he said, what's a recording engineer? I said, a guy that makes records. He said, we don't make records here in the Air Force. I said, well, I know you don't, but I don't know. He said, I don't know what you're going to do, Brent. So anyway, we started going through, you know, different books and stuff. And I said, well, it's got something to do with electronics. So let me just start there. So I started studying basic electronics, and I did bone up on my math, that's for sure. And then they had a few little things on acoustics and sound acoustics and information like that. But I have to say it wasn't much. But I did dive into it, you know, and there was all correspondence things, you know, and I'd get my little packets and I'd study and I'd fill out a little test and get my report back, you know. And so then it came time, you know, my enlistment was wrapping up, and I had to take, you know, my dream to the streets, so to speak. And I think I had a week to go. God, I should have started earlier. But anyway, I had about a week to go, and I figured I'd hit the road and visit some recording studios in Nashville, which didn't take long. There was about 6 maybe.
So what year was this?
Oh, that would have been 65.
Okay.
Or 65 or 6. I'll look at my discharge papers. But anyway, I went by. I remember coming into Columbia here, and got shown the exit door within 45 seconds. You know, I didn't even get to talk to an engineer. They just said, we don't need anybody. And number 2, what would be your qualifications? And so that didn't go well. And then I went into RCAB, and the same treatment. You know, I mean, it was just. And then I went to a little studio on Thompson Lane that had egg cartons, you know, all over the walls, a little garage studio. And it was even more apparent. I don't think I lasted 30 seconds there. So anyway, you know, that was about it. That was about all the studios there were. And I was, you know, scared to death, because I had 30 days where I could have re-enlisted. So I did have sort of a backup plan, but that didn't seem all that appealing. And I had my yellow page, I should say, and the very last door to open, the last door. And I was just so shot down, was Foster Recording, downtown on 7th Avenue. And if anybody remembers, you know, Foster's back in those days, the only issue with that place, it was arguably the best studio in town, but the parking was awful. And I went back in the alley on 7th Avenue, and there's signs as big as billboards. It said, if you block this alley, baby, your car won't be here. And I just didn't care. I honestly didn't care. So I blocked the alley, went in the back door, went up a freight elevator. The door opened into the most beautiful foyer that you could imagine. And a lady behind the desk, even more gorgeous than the foyer was, Janice. And she just looked at me and said, can I help you? And I said, I'd like to apply for a job. She said, as what? I said, I want to learn how to be a recording engineer. And she says, well, let me get one of our engineers out to talk to you. Well, I was floored. I mean, those were kind words. So Tommy Strong comes out, a wonderful engineer, and he talks to me for about 30 minutes, and I didn't get kicked out the door. You know, he was a bit encouraging, and he said, oddly enough, he said, the studio manager here, Mr. Bill Porter, and I were talking last night that we had to get somebody because we're sort of sinking here with all of our workload, and we just need a helper of some sort. And I did everything in my power, you know, to convey to him that, man, I'm your helper. And so I walked out of there absolutely on cloud 9. Did not care if my car was there or not, but it was. So I got in my car and I went home, and I had an appointment set up with Bill Porter, who, if I would have known who he was, I would have never made it through my next interview, because Bill had already by then engineered 4 or 5 of, I mean, life-changing records for me. Only the Lonely, you know, Running Scared, Kathy's Clown, for God's sakes. Incredible record. If I'd have known he'd have done that, I don't think I could have. I used to stutter a bit anyway. I would have not made it, you know, through the interview. But anyway, I met with Bill, and Bill said, you know, we're in need. I like it that you've, you know, served your country for 4 years. I like it that you're, you know, tried to prepare yourself a little bit, you know, to try to do something like this. And he said, we can give you 3 weeks. He said, in 3 weeks, we'll know, not necessarily whether you have any talent or not, you know, but we will know whether we can work together, and Tommy and I feel that we can bring you along to where you need to be. We will know that in 3 weeks.
And Foster of Foster Studios was Fred.
Fred Foster, yeah. Now, eventually, you know, once Bill made that call, even though he was a studio manager, he had to run everything by Fred. And I'm sure Fred said, in fact, well, I found out later, I know he said, Bill, it's up to you. If you want to hire the kid, go ahead. And that was my opportunity. I had that one last door, and it happened to be the right one. And of course, Bill and Tommy were unbelievably sweet to me and kind and stern, and damn near worked me to death. I mean, in those 3 weeks, I guarantee you, I was working 70 hours a week, because I was the guy for both of them.
Right.
So if there was a 10 and 2, I was there at 8. If Bill came in at 6 or did a 6 and 10, I would be there till 2 or 3 in the morning, and back the next morning at 8:30. Fill the Coke machine, make the coffee. If the janitor didn't do exactly what he needed to do, make sure I would clean that up. But I knew that I wasn't going to get ushered out in 3 weeks. I was going to do everything I could possibly do. Never yawn, never look disinterested, because I never was. I mean, God, how could you be? Hearing big speakers and all these great musicians and everything going on and making a record, you know. I mean, it was just like the adrenaline in my body was probably maxed out from the second I walked in until I left, you know.
Right. Who were some of the artists that were working at Foster's at that time?
Well, I do believe the first session I ever saw was Roy Orbison. And that's when I just literally, when I passed muster with my interview with Bill, I think he said, "What are you doing tomorrow night?" And I said, "Tomorrow night?" And he said, "Well, we have a session here, and you might want to come and observe it. And not that we'll give you any functions, but observe it." And I said, "Sure." So I make my way back. You know, I still think I had 2 or 3 days left of my enlistment. And but I went back, walked in those doors, and oh, it was such a great studio, huge studio, 75 by 45, just the recording space. And you know, there were people. God, there must have been 30 people there. And I started looking at the rhythm section and started looking at, you know, the string section over here, and then there were some background singers. Later I would find it was the choral singers sitting over here, and then I looked to I looked over here a little bit, and I almost fainted. It was Roy Orbison, who, you know, there again, since I was 13 years old, was one of the most influential stars in my life, and there he was. And I honestly didn't know. I felt like I couldn't get out of the way of people. I was so insecure about, I was afraid to take a step. I might knock something over or break something, or, you know. So I just edged my way around and didn't want to bother anybody, and couldn't take my eyes off Roy, which was a troubling thing because I might bump into something. But anyway, found my way back to the control room, and you know, Bill said, "Hey, Brent, how you doing?" He introduced me to Fred Foster. He said, "This is Fred Foster. He owns this place." I went, "Oh, Mr. Foster." I don't know what Fred said. Hi. Anyway, God Almighty, and then I'd never heard speakers that big. I mean, my little band didn't have A7s. You know, we didn't have anything as big as 604s or something like that. So all of a sudden, you know, and Bill, I mean, the guys back then, they cranked them.
Yeah.
You know, they cranked them. And so all of a sudden, I'm hearing all of this music come together. And Roy Orbison, and then his co-writer, Joe Melson, who wrote a lot of songs with him, would always sing harmony with him, right behind him, on the same mic. And I'm watching all of this in complete sensory overload. And then hearing Orbison's voice coming through speakers like that in this environment. I mean, to be honest with you, I mean, my heart was just flip-flopping. You know, I could hardly catch my breath. And so that was an amazing experience. And of course, the funny thing about that too was, well, not funny, but the way the business worked, was when the session was over, And Orbison only booked 10 o'clock at night sessions, always. And they had always cut just 2 songs, an A side and a B side. And then, you know, session was done, everybody's gone, records mixed, done. And Bill walks into what was called the lacquer channel back in those days, which was, you know, the disc cutting room. And he transfers and masters, you know, from the Bono tape into the Neumann lathe. And he said, Brent, he said, on your way home, you need to go by, and he gave me this address, and it was a pressing plant, Sounds of Nashville. And Fred had this deal to when anytime Orbison cut, obviously parts went out that night and the next morning, shipped to all the different distributors that were pressing records for Monument. But they had local pressing plants that he kept open. And it was my job to go by there and take those masters all wrapped up in cellophane, which I couldn't quite figure out what they were because the hole was only this big, and I knew 45s had holes this big. So that didn't make a lot of sense to me, but I did what I was told. The next day, I heard that record on radio, the very next day. And which I never will forget that. I said, I was there, oh my God, I was in the room. So the Everlys cut there, same thing. And seeing the Everly brothers for the first time, they were equally as important to me in my you know, teenage years. Gosh, who else recorded? There's so many big stars, it's hard to remember. But I would say that, you know, seeing Roy and the Everlys, well, also Joe Tex, you know, a great R&B singer. And on that particular session, oh my gosh, I'm trying to think. Buddy Killen produced that. Mm-hmm. But there was a lot of activity.
Now, at what point did you leave Nashville and go to Las Vegas,
Mm-hmm.
I think, with United?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Bill Porter. And because my father had passed away when I was quite young, Bill, you know, meant a lot more in my life than just a teacher and just a guy that gave me my first job, which is a big deal. But we became really close, and he surprised us all one day when he comes to the studio. He says, "Well, I've been thinking about this, but I've just purchased United Recording out in Las Vegas, Nevada, and I'm just, you know, I gave Fred notice yesterday that I'd be leaving in a couple of weeks and moving out to Las Vegas." Well, I was floored. Like, Las Vegas of all places, you know. Bill was a family guy, a couple of kids, and I said, how do you do this in Las Vegas, you know? And so anyway, he ups and leaves, and of course in his place came another legendary Nashville engineer, Mort Thomason, who there again, another great guy for me to work beside and to learn from and get some ideas from, you know. And by then, you know, I was getting behind the board myself. This was about maybe a year and a half into, almost 2 years, where I could actually do a session. And actually had my first client, and that was Mr. Buzz Cason. The first guy that believed in me was Buzz. And my first master session was a huge hit record in Everlasting Love. And so to say I'm indebted, you know, to Buzz Cason is and to Matt Gaden, of course, who wrote the song, you know, with Buzz and co-produced it with him. But I owe so much to Buzz. Anyway, so that was you know, I was sort of on the rise, and I was, by probably 10 years, the youngest engineer in Nashville. Because the reason that I got shown the door in all these other studios was because all these other fellas had worked up through radio and TV. They all mixed radio shows, they mixed TV shows, And that was sort of the channel to get up to a major recording studio. But I mean, that's why nobody gave me the time of day. I mean, why would they? Except Bill. So anyway, I was a younger guy, and that it worked for me in a sense, because maybe some clients felt it, and I was, maybe I was a little bit more into the modern music, I don't know. But Buzz believed it, thank God. And so Everlasting Love was a hit, doing quite well. And I got a call from Bill Porter. And he said, "Hey, Brent, it's Bill." And I said, "Man, it's so good to hear from you. And how are you doing out there?" And he said, "Well, just smoking it." And he said, "I need help." And I went, "Okay." And he said, "Would you consider moving out here?" And I said, "Bill, I can't imagine living there." And he said, "It's not necessarily what you think. It's not just the billboards with half-naked women on them." He said, it's more than that. And he said, "And it's a great studio." He said, "Would you come out and just look at it?" And I said, "Absolutely." And, so that weekend I hop in the plane and I go out there, and we literally worked 24 hours. We worked all the way around the clock on this one project. And I looked on the walls, and I see a photo of Louis Armstrong taken, recorded in that studio. George Shearing. I mean, all these different stars. Oh my gosh, it was just Buddy Rich. I mean, it was, and then I looked at the studio book and all the people that were coming in, and I said, whoa. And I don't know, that little boy spoke to me and said, this is the deal. This is where you need to go. And so I said, "Let me think about it, Bill." So I came back home and talked to Janelle, and she said, "It's up to you, but I think we should too, probably." So then I broke the news to Fred. Fred thought I was completely nuts, and he said, "Man, I had some great ideas for you to start producing for me and do some things like this." And I said, "Fred, I just feel in my gut that I'm supposed to be with Bill, and I'm supposed to be out there." And so that's where I was for 7 years,
Now, in looking at your discography,
Mm-hmm.
and it's something that I try to instill in students, is don't get locked into one genre of music. You've certainly
Yes.
got the variety with the Fifth Dimension, Gladys Knight,
Mm-hmm.
the Judds. It's the whole range. I've even seen you've got Chuck Berry, Sammy Davis Jr.
Oh, yeah.
on here.
Mhm.
Did that develop while you were in Vegas, or was that just?
Yeah, that a lot of those names were at United. It was such an interesting time period because the music culture was changing there. You still had Sammy Davis, you had the Rat Pack guys, Sinatra, you'd have Bobby Darin, who I became very dear friends with. You'd have Merle Haggard and Dottie West and people like that working downtown, on the Fremont Street in that area, but on the Strip, like I said, you would have, Vicky Carr and people like this, but also you had Diana Ross, you had the Supremes, you had Smokey Robinson, and then there was a bit of a rock and roll revival because the baby boomers were starting to spend money in Vegas. So then you had Chuck Berry, Fats Domino, you had the Coasters, you had all of these bands that were sort of getting repackaged and put back out there. Count Basie would be working in a room somewhere. And like I got to, record with Val Valentine, Duke Ellington's. I think it was his last record before he passed away. Just a duo album, with Duke and Ray Brown. What an honor that was, because there again, I was raised on that music. Yeah, I actually got to take Duke back to his hotel. I had a little yellow Mazda, and everybody had left, and Duke was going to call a cab, and I said, "Sir," I said, "I'd be glad to drive you back to the hotel." He said, "Well, that would be nice, young man." And so we got back in the car, and I told him about being raised in Kansas. And I don't know why I thought that was important, but I was raised on his music, and he was thought that was fascinating. And God, I've never met somebody as, I don't know, he had such a gentle, just spirit about himself and elegant. I guess he was just like, just so eloquent. Anyway, elegant. It was so, I had a chance to, engineer big bands all the time. Guy Lombardo, I got to record his band, which there again my mom and dad used to listen to. The symphony there, I did work with the symphony. And then, all these Motown artists were coming in. So I got to work with some of the great, Deke Richards, a wonderful Motown producer, guy Smokey, I worked with Smokey as a producer. And then some of the greatest engineers from the West Coast would come in there. And sometimes they would run the board, and sometimes they'd let me run the board, and they would give me sort of their ideas of what they wanted to get, and which is like Eddie Brackett. Well, Eddie Brackett made some of the greatest records ever. And Larry Levine, or Levine, that put Gold Star on the map, and was A&M's guy, that made so many of those records. Sergio Mendez and Alpert and all those records were Levine's stamp. And then setting aside Bones Howe on the Aquarius album, helping him with all of the vocals, and a couple overdubs, but mostly vocals, for like 2 weeks. God, watching him work was just amazing. So, it was like getting a master's or something in engineering and producing, seeing how some of these great guys would work. Phil Ramone worked there, and I got to work with Phil. It was just like an amazing amount of stars coming in every genre of music you could imagine. Sly and the Family Stone's first record was cut in that. The whole album was cut at United there, with the exception of Dance to the Music. Dance to the Music was like 15 with a Bullet or something like that, but the entire rest of that record was cut there at United. So, which was an experience. Oh my God, those guys, incredible. So that's just like and of course, how could I forget Argentina? I engineered Proud Mary from scratch, and mixed it and everything, and I did 2 albums with him in that studio, and became, really good friends with Tina and with Ike, and so it was an amazing time to be out there.
So you were there 7 years?
7 years. Mm-hmm.
And then you got a calling back?
Right.
You wound up back in Nashville?
Well, things sort of came to a screeching halt in Vegas. It was right around the time that, actually, it was at the same time. Bill had just mixed and done a lot of overdubs on Suspicious Minds. This was when Elvis had made his big comeback and was, worked in Vegas. It was his first gig in Vegas. And a couple of things happens. Number one, Elvis found out that Bill Porter, who he dearly loved, was in Las Vegas, and he wanted Bill to mix his show at the International. Well, that was like a cannon going off, because that was never done. And because it was such a union town, they had their people to mix those shows. And Elvis just said, doesn't make any sense to me. The guy that knows my music as well as I do is here. He's mixing the show. You guys work it out. And I'm telling you, man, he put their hammer down, and they knuckled under. And so Bill was just like, all of a sudden, man, I hardly saw him because he was working so much with Elvis, rehearsals and everything. And I was busy, oddly enough, I was doing a Louis Prima record, who I loved. I came into work one day, and there was a policeman, half as big as the door. And I tried to, get past him, and he said, "Where do you think you're going?" I said, "To work?" He said, "I don't believe so." I said, "Why wouldn't I be? I have a key. He said, that key will get you into nothing because the studio is burned down. I said, looks like it's here to me. And he said, that's just the outside. The inside is done, gone. I couldn't believe it. And he said, you can't go in because it's under investigation. And so I was like, in total shock. And I did go back about an hour later, and I think he felt sorry for me or something. He said, well, I can go with you, but you can't touch anything, nothing. And so he let me in. Man, I stuck my hands in my pocket, and I walked around, and I just had tears in my eyes because it was done, gone. And I had house payments, I had car notes, and I had no job overnight, just like that. And luckily, we had a little bit of money saved, a wee bit, and I did have some job offers. Ike had just purchased Bollock Sound and offered me the moon to go in there and run that studio. It was carte blanche.
And where was that studio?
That was in L.A.,
Okay.
in Inglewood, called Bollock Sound. Big Dan Flickinger consoles. These were great rooms. Marvin Gaye cut a bunch of his stuff there. So anyway, they had that opportunity. Bones Howe, and he and I became really good friends working on the Aquarius record. And Bones said, man, anytime you want, I'd love to talk to you about working for Mr. Bones Production as a producer-engineer. And so that was an opportunity. And then Val Valentine from, the Ellington record kind of liked the way I worked a bit. And he said that if you're in L.A., stop by the studio. So I did have those opportunities. And so my wife and I made a long weekend of like probably a Friday on and went to L.A. and hit all those places, talked to, Bones for a little bit and to Val at MGM, I think it was, Studios. And then, went and hung out with Ike and Tina for a while. And then drove home, and I don't know, I didn't have a clear picture. It wasn't like, oh, for sure I'm going to do this. And I said, I'm going to call Buzz Cason and just see what's going on in Nashville, because I had no idea what was going on in that 7 years. No idea. And here's the darndest thing. I pick up the phone, and I called Creative Workshop, and whoever was the receptionist answers the phone. And I said, is Buzz Cason around? She said, who's calling? And I said, well, this is Brent Maher. She said, oh, okay. So Buzz gets on the line, and Buzz says, Brent, I can't believe that my girl found you this quick. And I said, what do you mean, Buzz? And he said, I just told her to run you down. I've got to talk to you. It wasn't a minute and a half ago. And I said, she never called. And he said, well, you're on the phone. And I said, yeah, but she didn't call. And he said, well, what are you doing on the phone? I said, I want to talk to you. And he said, oh my God, I can't believe this. And so anyway, he told me why he was trying to run me down, a record we had cut on Robert Knight 7 years earlier, a B-side to one of the tunes that we cut was a smash over in England, #1 record, and they had no album, nothing to follow it up with. And he said, Brent, is there any way Bill could cut you loose from United just for like a week? He said, man, I've got Norbert, I've got Kenny Buttery, I've got Mac, I've got everybody. I just don't have you. Could you figure out a way to do that? I said, I think we can work that out, Buzz. And so, a lot of, a popular term tossed around said, oh my gosh, wasn't that a God thing? And I don't like to use words like that very lightly, but it was. And that's just one one door that was open for me, and a gentle push, from God that said, "This is what you're supposed to be doing, silly boy." And I could go through a list of those things, but that's one of the biggies for sure.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, obviously, in the bio that I've got will cover a lot of Nashville.
Mm-hmm.
This has been wonderful. I'm learning a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
Getting some chill bumps with those kind of stories
Okay.
too.
Yeah.
On that, one of the things that I want to ask you, because one of the questions already has been answered. Who is your mentor? So I think that
Right,
was
right.
been answered quite
Mhm.
quite sufficiently. What was one of your? We've all had these working in this industry. What was your most memorable on-the-job learning moment? One of those things that still sticks with you today. That I didn't know that at the time I've done it, or it's something I'll never do again.
Mhm.
Something like that.
It's hard for me to put on some sort of a recording moment in my life to where a big door opened. There's a couple of memories, not memories, things that happened that opened a door for me sort of emotionally about where I was and what I could do. And one of them, of course, was Mr. Fred Foster. Anytime Fred came into the studio, anytime, Bill Porter was the engineer, as well he should be. I mean, why not? He was arguably one of the top 2 or 3 engineers that's ever made a record in Nashville, or ever will make a record in Nashville. And so I see on the books that Arthur Alexander is coming in to the studio. And Fred was in the studio, and he and Bill were wrapping up a session, and I was out in the studio, doing my job, coiling up cables and putting mics away and stuff like that. And I walk into the control room, and Fred's still around. And he and Bill are talking, and Fred says to me, "Hey, Brent," he said, "that Everlasting Love record," which was on his label, by the way, he said, "That's really a great sounding record, Brent. Congratulations." And I was like, "Thank you, Mr. Foster." He said, "Well, good. Did you notice that Arthur Alexander is coming in next week?" And I said, "Oh, yeah." I said, "God, I love Arthur Alexander." And he said, "Well, how would you like to do it with me?" I felt like saying, why? You got Bill Porter here, old Mr. Pretty Woman. I mean, you got, a guy that I couldn't carry, a pail of water for him, and without slopping it, And I said, well, Fred, and I looked at Bill, and I was saying, like, is Bill on vacation or something? And I saw Bill smiling from ear to ear, just thrilled. That, and obviously he had talked about it, with Fred. And that moment when Fred Foster would want me to engineer something for him, and I'm thinking, maybe this just isn't luck with Everlasting. Maybe I can do this. And actually I felt, I know I can do it. Because if Fred said so, then I could do it,
And then one more thing
Mm-hmm.
just to wrap this
Yeah.
up. Of course, in Nashville, we've got probably 7 different schools that teach music
Right.
business, recording engineering, songwriting, all that. Chris, real quickly, how did your songwriting trifecta start?
The first time I picked up a guitar at probably, 13, you wind up trying to write something, or at least I did. And I can remember that song, "Baby, I Love You." There's a title for you. Anyway, but I never considered myself a songwriter. I mean, I just, in the little band we played in, to make extra money, it was a cover band, But how that happened is when I was working with Ike and Tina, his guitar playing was so kind of just basic, just rough and tough around the edges, and his rhythm was unbelievable. And I just, in the way Tina sang, I mean, I got unbelievably inspired by them musically. And I went home one evening, and it was really late, but I went and picked up my little black dual jet Gretsch guitar, which is electric, so it doesn't make much noise. And I sat there in the living room, and I was sort of pretending to be Ike. I mean, I was just playing, and a little melody popped into my head, and I started humming this melody, and then all of a sudden, a couple of words fell out. And I sat there and wrote a song that night. It took me about an hour. And I was totally pretending, you know, to be Ike and Tina. And Janelle, the next day, said, "What were you doing last night?" And I said, "Well, I picked up my guitar," which I hadn't touched in a couple of years. And she said, "Well, it sounded like you were kind of singing." And I said, "Well, yeah, I wrote a song." And so I played it for her, and she loved it. So, you know, I went into the studio, I just laid it down, just, you know, guitar, vocal. And actually, I overdubbed on it. I brought some drums in. I played a little drum part on it and a bass part. And I don't know why, but I did. Anyway, Lord, I was mortified. Ike came in early, like one day, and I was kind of listening to my masterpiece. And he walked into the control room. And before I could hit stop, he says, "What is that?" And I said, "Oh," he said, "Man, that's funky." He said, "Is that you?" I mean, yeah. He goes, "Man, that's really ignorant." I said, I think that's a good thing. I don't know. And of course I knew it was, because that was his favorite words. And so he said, "I'm going to play this for Tina." And I went, "Okay." So he plays it for Tina. Well, she loves it. And he looks at me and says, "I want you to co-produce this with me. Let's make a record." I was floored. So, and it did. It came out as a single and got to like 17, I think, in the R&B charts. I still have the review from Record World. It says, this chunk of funk is bound to be a chart topper, you know. Anyway, there again, that was my, you know, and I did write another song after that, and we cut that on him too. Anyway, jump forward, now I'm back in Nashville. And I'm having success, thank God, the studio's doing well. And I've started, you know, spread my wings a little bit more as a producer. And I have a big old hit with Steve Gibson as a co-producer on Michael Johnson, Bluer Than Blue. You know, my first hit as a producer, you know, co-producer, I shall say. And Randy Goodrum, of course, wrote Bluer Than Blue. So Randy is over at my house, and he's pitching some songs for us, Steve and I, to consider for Michael. Well, I'm clearing out my music area, and he sees this 45 with Ike and Tina Turner on it. He said, "Oh man, Ike and Tina, yeah, I forgot, you did Proud Mary, right?" And I said, "Yeah, man, I did Proud Mary and some other things." And he picks up just 45, and he said, "Well, this isn't Proud Mary." He said, "Work on Me?" I said, "Well, yeah, you know, it wasn't that big of a hit." And he said, "But you wrote this thing?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "By yourself?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "You co-produced it with Ike?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Oh man, we got to hear this." And I went like, "No, we don't need to hear that." You know, and he just wouldn't go further. He said, "No, before we play another tune, I want to hear this thing." And he puts it on, and I wanted to leave the room almost, you know. And but anyway, Randy listens to it, and it's over, and he said, "Why aren't you writing songs?" And I said, "Because I'm not a songwriter. I'm a record producer. I'm an engineer." He said, "True, but you're a songwriter, man." He said, "You and I are going to start writing." And I said, "No, Randy." I said, "Whatever that was, that's then. I'm living in the now." And he said, no, do whatever you want to do, but you're writing with me. And he actually booked an appointment for the following week. And I showed up, and we wrote a song together. Here's the kicker. It seemed so easy back then. He shows that song to Chet, and Chet cuts it on Perry Como. So the first two songs I'd written, since I'd been 13, the first one, Work on Me, was recorded by Ike and Tina. The second one, I don't remember the title, was recorded by Chet and Perry Como. You know, how hard can it be?
Yeah, everybody can do it, right?
Everybody can do it. So anyway, the wonderful time and the wonderful hours upon hours I've spent songwriting, which I do dearly love, by the way, that door was 100% opened by Randy Goodrum. You know, all the blame goes on his shoulders, you know.
Well, back to where I was going, and thanks for the side trip.
Yeah.
Because that's all very important. But Audio Engineering Society, one of
Yeah.
our missions
Right.
is education.
Right.
Of course, with
Mhm.
young people, both for adults in the
Mhm.
profession and up and coming.
Right.
And there are numerous schools in Nashville now that are teaching the aforementioned songwriting, engineering,
Right.
live sound, the whole gamut. of
Right.
this. What would your one piece of career advice be for those who desire a career in any of the above-mentioned professions
Mhm, mhm.
in this?
Right. You know, I would say my one piece of advice is don't be afraid of open doors. Don't be afraid of any door that might just be opened a tiny crack. You know, I have told myself many times, this is my career path. This is all I want to be. And sure enough, I've been pushed in another direction, another little door, and I walked through them. And there again, like songwriting, I had no aspirations of being a songwriter. But that door got open to me, and now it's been a huge part of my life. As I started out to being a recording engineer, I can promise you the only thing I ever wanted to be was a recording engineer. But then an opportunity made itself, you know, for me to be a record producer. And so I took that challenge on. So I think always keep an open mind. And, you know, if you get turned down, if you get naysayers, if you get people saying that, man, I don't know, that may not be the path for you, you just got to keep opening that next door, you know. I had 6 doors absolutely slammed in my face. But I did have that one other door, and that's the one that I mustered up the courage to get rejected again.
Right.
and walk through it, and which I'm sure I had help from the man upstairs on that one too. But that's would be my advice. You know, always keep your options open. Work hard. You know, don't lose focus. But when opportunities arise, don't be afraid of them.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I really appreciate your coming in to do this. Is there anything you want to say, just off the cuff, or we done?
Well, I've babbled an awful lot, but it's been, and of course I'm still working, so I am thrilled about that. But when I look back at my life, it's just like my favorite movie is A Wonderful Life. And when he says, it's just a wonderful life, my God, you know, I certainly fall in that category. I've been able to say that with all sincerity. You know, my wife of 50 some odd years and 2 wonderful kids, and a career that has allowed me to work with and sit alongside with almost half of all of my musical heroes, people that truly affected me. I mean, from taking Duke Ellington back to the hotel to working with Bobby Darin, meeting Fats Domino and talking to him in the studio, mixing and recording Elvis Presley's last #1 before he died. You know, I mean, Elvis to me was, heart-stopping. The Everly Brothers. I mean, I've had a chance to work, and Ray Charles, for gosh sakes, I had a chance to mix some of his music with him right there beside me. I mean, it almost seems impossible. If I read my own bio, I sometimes think it's just almost not possible. So yes,
Right.
you know, I'm very fortunate.
Well, thanks for doing this. We're glad to have you part of Audio Engineering Society as a Lifetime Achievement Award recipient, and we're looking forward to the event in a couple of weeks.
Well, I don't know if anything is going to match this for me. This award for me is probably, it'll be the most important moment in my career, because all I ever wanted to be was an engineer.
All right, this from a multiple Grammy Award winner.
Yeah, but all I wanted to be was an engineer.
Thank you, Brent.
You bet.
It's